Thank you. I will start this talk by throwing you right into a scene from my fieldwork in Kalimantan, Indonesia, the scene forming a sort of prologue to the talk. As I entered Mbola's house an evening in 2015, Mimi is lying on her stomach on the kitchen floor, crying desperately. Her frail body is shaking and she seems inconsolable. Manchan, a shaman brought over to help, holds a small plate of burning incense wood over her head, the scent of garu filling the room. To scare off any intruding spirits, he explains. Mimi's life has been marked by repeated spells of fainting, a sign of potential spirit assault and ensuing soul loss these past months, hence the emotional outburst. Her condition was revealed to me last night as I was called to the house to take some portraits of the family. Dressed up in slim fit jeans and a colorful t-shirt for the occasion, Mimi was joking around with some friends, playing pop music on her new cell phone, posing for the camera. Then all of a sudden, she seemed to drift off, staring blankly into space, falling unconscious. People gather around her, with an uncle of hers blowing air on her, rubbing her back, while some women splashed cold water over her body, reading some spells. After a while, she regained consciousness again, smiled faintly, and fell into a deep sleep. Beginning with this scene, I hope to draw you into the tactile, sensuous, often involuntary way people are affected by others, including human and non-human such. It should be mentioned here that this paper is very much work in progress, where all threads thrown out are not quite tied together yet. So I hope you bear with me for that, and I'm also very open to suggestions on how to develop it. Also, the presentation is based on a rather long case story, it will probably go around 5 to 10 minutes over the 30 minutes recommended, for which I apologize. Anyway, to introduce my theoretical framework, I will start with a provocation. Agribusiness writing, proclaims Michael Taussig. Sorry, there's something happening. Wants to drain the wetlands, or to use an imagery more opposite to the forested upland era of Indonesian Borneo, with which this paper is concerned, it seeks to clear-cut the forest and the swin rice fields which are enfolded in it, thus replacing it with the straight rows of monocrop planting. Citing Taussig, as if by magic the disorder of the world will be straightened out. Rarely, if ever, with such writing do we get the sense of chaos moving not to order, but to another form of chaos. Taussig proposes apotropic writing as a counter-magic to agribusiness writing, writing that knows no wonder. Like apotropic magic, which is used to ward off harmful magic, apotropic writing counters the purported realism of agribusiness writing through re-enchantment. Taking its cue from Taussig by attending to the domain of the unknown while trying to resist the urge to render it fully known or comprehensible. In this talk, I explore how a deeply felt sense of relational vulnerability and existential bewilderment spills over into sorcery accusations and healing practices among the Luangan Dayak, an indigenous group of shifting cultivators who live in the border area between the provinces of East and Central Kalimantan in Indonesian Borneo. And this is a map of the area where people live in the middle of it, like here. The paper forms an experimental case study of sorts, built around a series of loosely connected events which occurred during my intermittent fieldwork there in between 2011 and 2017, a period characterized by rapid environmental and social change. In these events, various members of an extended family, and especially a middle-aged man for whom I used the pseudonym Maompan, serve as central characters. Featuring as both a sorcerer and a healer, Maompan is an equivocal protagonist, exemplifying the ambiguous nature of Luangan's social relations within the present. Accused of harming various relatives, both manifestly and through sorcery, when they refused to sell land to a palm oil company, Maompan insisted on performing a healing ritual for Mimi, the young woman in the prologue, maybe to counter such accusations, raising mixed feelings of fear and hope among the few daring to attend the event. Perhaps as much through his potential or imaginary involvement as his actual one, Maompan actualized an anxiety about the role of others in the lives of those affected that is at the focus of my talk. My exploration of the events is centered around a concern with the tactile, sensuous, often involuntary effect or influence what a man attempting to treat Mimi called pengaruh, of an essentially unknowable and unpredictable other. Illuminating the embodied effects of being in relation, the paper serves to open up to encounters with that which may alter us. Moving towards the unknown in relations between people, it seeks to shed light on the importance of the uncontrollable in social life, exposing the intrinsic precariousness as well as the equally inherent potentiality of the unanticipated. In theoretical terms, the article engaged with the affective tenor of encounters through what the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas called the mystery of another person, and probes the ethical and existential implications of what Jared Sigon calls intersubjective attunement. For Levinas, the other's exteriority is an irreducible and basic condition of ethical life, entailing sensuous receptivity. Ethics to him take place in a space of not knowing, in an essentially affective, precognitive sphere of embodied sensibility. The events described in the paper are connected and chosen for consideration not only because of Maompan's real or imaginary role in them then, but due to the quality of illustrating a more general stance of not knowing and an epistemic uncertainty which marks Luangan being in the world and being with others, now perhaps more acutely than ever after the tropical rainforest on which they used to subsist has been cleared, burned and sacrificed to capitalism through oil palm cultivation. In a sense, Maompan, through his actions and the affective responses they generated, came to personify the ambivalence with which many Luangans equally face the hauntings of the present and the other's unknowability. But let's start with some context. The Luangans are, or at least until recently, were shifting cultivators of hill rice and a wide variety of other food crops, which are grown intermixed with the rice in biannually planted swin gardens. Located in secondary or primary upland rainforest, these gardens mirror the forest surrounding them, forming undulating environments of multi-species entanglements. Swin cultivation is complemented with hunting and gathering of forest products. That's a swin field. In the past, the Luangans used to live dispersed in the forest, shifting residence between frequently moved multifamily houses and single-family farmhouses located in the swin fields. Even after village settlement, and that's the village where I did my fieldwork, was imposed upon them by the Dutch colonial government, many of them had continued to spend much of their time in farmhouses located in the forest. When I first visited the area in the early 1990s, it could only be reached by foot, as rivers there mostly are unnavigable. Today there are roads connecting most villages. Some roads. The Luangan's foraging lifestyles is paralleled by a dynamic mode of open aggregated sociality, a condition entailing that social relations and groups may be established and dissolved with relative ease. While kinship is universal in the sense that all local social relations are cast in an idiom of kinship, it is also highly flexible and based on enactment through continuous interaction. Only people with whom one engages in long-term relations become true relatives, cabem bene, whereas relatives with whom one has no active relationship may easily be forgotten. There is nonetheless a strong incentive to keep up kin relations through the sharing and formal distribution of food and resources, through mutual help and cooperation, visiting and participation in rituals, not the least since close relations are associated with trust and expectations of mutual responsibility and provide for vital social resources contingent precisely on enactment. And some pictures of ritual sharing of food. At the same time, fear of others, or what Luangans would call other than kin or people, ulun, is deep-seated, and most Luangans I knew were wary not to become poisoned or targets of sorcery when visiting non-relatives. While it provides for social resources and a degree of perceived safety, intimacy is also associated with envy, and the open-ended inclusive nature of kinship and the vivid immediacy-based nature of interaction in small communities mean that demands of kinship and sharing may become overpowering at times. Relatedness in this context is notably not only based on enactment, but involves ongoing negotiation with an extended sphere of affective closeness sustained through concrete performative presence and long-term histories of intimate mutual involvement. Kinship is also centrally extended to include other than humans, especially spirits of various kinds. As with human relations, relations with spirits have to be cultivated mainly through the offerings of food and respect in very frequent shamanic rituals called belian. Human well-being being conditioned on the spirit's benevolence. And here are some pictures of the offerings given by the shamans to the spirits. And we can maybe go back to these later if you want to. These are spirit houses and food given to the spirits. And there's a shaman looking for guilty spirits dancing, and another shaman. Around 2011, palm oil companies entered the central Luangan region where I did most of my fieldwork, rapidly turning vast areas of tropical rainforest into oil palm plantations. While some people at first held out and refused to sell land to the oil palm estates, most eventually felt that they had no choice but to sell. If they would not, someone else would. While enough forest has presently still been left to grow wind rise in most villages effective, many villagers assert that it is only a matter of time before all forest will be sold. It is not only the natural landscape that has been radically transformed with the arrival of oil palm cultivation, but also it appears the Luangan social and moral economy. As long as conceptualize it, sharing and solidarity between kin and neighbors have undergone a rather drastic demise in recent years. Without money, you cannot survive today, inhabitants say, with both bewilderment and reproach. While many Luangans have embraced the opportunities of capitalism, welcoming the progress, a buzzword in Indonesian state discourse, and especially the monetary compensations received for land, there's also an outspoken ambivalence and uncertainty of future livelihood opportunities. Following a by now well-trodden path of studying how post-colonial modernities and in Indonesia the collapse of the Suharto regime and of state control in 1998 have produced particular forms of enchantment rather than disenchantment in Weber's sense, this paper explores Luangan responses to such environmental, economic, and social change by looking at how a deeply felt ambiguity regarding the current life situation is addressed through an idiom or what you might call occult. Rather than aiming to unveil the connection between the occult and the economy, though, my paper deals in uncertainty not as a new condition, but as an interminable one, which nevertheless seems to have taken on a particular urgency lately, not the least due to the scale and pace of recent change. Whereas knowing whom to trust, be they people or other beings, has always been something of a challenge for Luangans, it has become even more so today, I propose, as one cannot necessarily count on kin, even closely related kin, the way one used to. But let's now jump right into the case story, which I warn is quite long. An early morning in June 2011, Liru parked his motorbike outside Malutar's house, where most of us were still half asleep. Busting in through the back door, he agitatedly told us that he was on his way to the district capital to file a police report. His Sweden house, located halfway between his home village, Sambung, some 15 kilometers away, and Sembolan, the village where we were staying at the time, had burned down during the night. Whether the fire had started accidentally from the wooden stove in the kitchen or was caused intentionally by someone, he did not know. His exact expression was caused by a person, and as such ambiguous, suggesting that someone might have lighted the fire deliberately or that some sort of magic might have been involved. That's all palm. I forgot to show you, but that's the house. Burned down intentionally by whom, I wonder? The palm oil company out for his land. How can you ever know? And Seko Tau, he said, shaking his head. The site on which his farmhouse was situated had in fact already been sold to the palm oil company, I was now to learn. Sold behind his and his mother's back by Maompan, his maternal uncle. Angry, offended, Liru had forbidden the company to touch the land, claiming that his uncle did not have the right to sell it without their consent. Only the day before there had been a meeting held at the very site of the Sweden house between various representatives of Liru's extended family and the company, trying to work out a solution to the conflict. As long as I've known Liru and his parents, I got to know him when he was a child at first, they have kept their Sweden fields in the same area around Olenkakan, contrary to most of the neighbors who shift the locations of the Sweden sites every second year, abandoning an old site for a new one, often moving into a different era. Members of Liru's family have continuously guarded and made Swedens near Olenkakan, one or another family member always making a Sweden there ever since Liru's great-grandfather built an extended family house there 4 generations back. During my fieldwork in the 1990s, Maompan stayed with his former wife at Olenkakan almost permanently, visiting the village only on rare occasions. This made it all the more surprising when Liru's mother a few days later told me and my fieldwork partner that she suspected Maompan of having burned down the house. Maompan, her older brother. I was baffled both by the directness of the accusation and by the information itself. In a kind of stereotypical Southeast Asian way, Luangans avoid emotional outbursts and open accusations which are conceived of as intimidating and may provoke spiritual retribution and ensuing soul loss, instead preferring indirect language, controlled proceedings, and the use of intermediaries to handle conflicts. Not only had he burned down another house in the past, she now explained, but he had recently come by her house swinging his jungle knife, threatening to kill her if she refused to sell the land, which also was exceptional in that physical violence was practically non-existent during my early fieldwork. Which he very well might be able to, she insinuated, as he was in possession of very powerful magic. Understanding the event as a milestone of sorts, she had written down the date of the fire with black marker on her kitchen wall alongside the birth dates of her 2 children. A reminder of the danger of non-relationality, as it were, all the more graphic as it read next to the birth date of those who most centrally defined her relationally. Like other Luangan, she was addressed by the use of technonyms, which for women take the form of mother of X or grandmother of X. Marking a relational break rather than a beginning as with the birth date, the inscription granting the event a sort of permanency Luangan sociality usually negates. Then, 3 years later in 2014, as I was back in Sambung for more fieldwork, I received the news that Matelaus, the youngest brother of Maompan and Niru's mother, suddenly had died during the night. He and his 12-year-old son had been at home alone while his wife and the 2 children were on a visit to the district capital to enroll their oldest son in high school, when the boy, Lemak, suddenly had woken up in the middle of the night with the uncanny feeling that there was someone present in the room. He could not see anyone there, though. As he went over to his father's sleeping mattress, he found him having a seizure on the floor. Crying, he ran to his neighbors to ask for help. When they arrived a few minutes later, they found the man lying dead on the floor. Along with some members of Matelaus' extended family, we hiked a lift to Matelaus' home village a few days later to attend the funerary preparations. Upon arrival, we gathered in the family's newly built wooden house located along the main road leading into the village. As we sat down drinking some tea, chatting, someone asked me and my partner to show some old pictures of Matelaus that we had on our laptop. As we were watching the pictures, Matelaus' youngest daughter, with the directness of only a 3-year-old, told us that her father had been killed by a Persian, a human being. She used the word ulun, which may refer to a Persian, but also more specifically to a stranger, a non-relative. That's the girl. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see how her mother, who had overheard us, hurried out the front door, covering her mouth with the palm of her hand, trying not to burst into laughter. Outside, giggling nervously, she repeated what her daughter had said to some women sitting on the porch. Clearly, the child had spoken out of terms, revealing something that she might have overheard other people talk about, but which was not meant to be announced publicly. Yet reading between the lines and talking to other people afterwards, it became clear that the utterance was more than the mere figment of a child's imagination. While no direct accusations were uttered, there were insinuations of sorcery and of Maompan's involvement, people pointing out that he had been abusive towards his former wife and that he allegedly once had used sorcery to kill a woman who had refused his sexual advances. Maompan, keeping away from the funerary preparations of his own brother, did not do much in easing these rumors. Asserting that her father's death was caused by a human being, the young girl revealed what many people might have been thinking but would not say out loud. Not to announce something publicly is, as Liana Chua observed, to disentangle oneself from the implications of knowing, but also to avert the danger of ascribing events or relations with that kind of fixity, thereby ruling out other options while potentially forcing retribution. For Luangans, claiming not to know another may form a protection from the other's control precisely by allowing for a relational and situational indeterminacy, leaving judgments about reality unfixed and open to renegotiation, which as such made Nenliru's upfront accusation of her brother all the more remarkable. However, just how conflicted Maompan's relations within the community and his family were was revealed to me only a year later by another event in which Maompan, paradoxically enough, set out to heal a patient rather than to hurt someone. As described in the prologue, Mimi, at the time a girl in her late teens, described as still a child by some older women, who recently had married a much older man from a Luangan village some distance away, was suffering from repeated spells of fainting, tiras. Some nights she would fall unconscious up to 10 times, keeping everyone awake. Quite a number of shamanic healing rituals had already been held in the attempt to cure her, but to no long-term avail. It's a ritual. As soon as a taboo period following upon a ritual ended, the spells of fainting started again. During the past month alone, there had been 4 billion rituals arranged for her, including a larger Buntang Thanksgiving ritual, which had only just been brought to an end. In addition, there had been countless smaller healing sessions, what they call semur, where incantations were read and air was blown on the patient's body. Then, a few days after Mimi's last episode of fainting, Maumpan announced that he knew how to cure her, that another Belian healing ritual performed by him should be arranged. At the time, I did not know that Maumpan had trained as a shaman. During the over 20 years that I had visited the village, I had never before seen or heard of him performing a Belian ritual. People were visibly uncomfortable by his announcement and by the forthright way that he declared it. Usually, it is the family of a sick person that asks a shaman to perform a ritual, instead of the shaman himself offering his services. Even so, Mimi's family felt that it was impossible for them not to take up his offer. What if he was right? What if he really could cure her? Not to arrange a ritual where such intentions have been spoken out loud is dangerous, and it may cause spirit retribution, the announcement of ritual being perceived as a promise of offerings to the spirits. As the days passed, there were no news of the ritual's start, however. This in itself was not unusual. It often takes time to gather the resources needed for a ritual, which include collecting plants for the ritual paraphernalia, drying rice to feed participants, procuring sacrificial animals, and finding the human resources needed for the various tasks of ritual work. These are some of the paraphernalia and food given to spirits and houses. And that's more of them. The main reason stated for the delay in this case, though, was that Maumpan refused to have the ritual performed in the village where Mimi lived at the time, but requested it to be arranged in a small Sweden house an hour's walk from the village along the new road to Sambung, not far from Niru Sweden, where Niru Sweden house had been located. Why there, we asked? Because Maumpan was not brave enough to perform the ritual in the village, people suggested, did not want an audience, did not want other shamans to judge his performance. But why? In my experience, shamans gain much of the authority precisely from gathering an audience, and Belian rituals are always open to anybody who wishes to attend. Indeed, it is deemed favorable if they gather a large audience. His skills as a Belian were not good enough, it was suggested. He did not really know the lyrics of Belian healing, only knew some spells bought from Malays downriver. He was not really a shaman, Belian, they proposed, as he had not done any proper training. Villagers even tried to discourage me and my partner from attending the ritual when it finally was about to start. There won't be much to see or hear. It will be a waste of time, they said, referring to our habit of recording and transcribing the chants of shamans. At least don't bring photographs of us with you to the ritual, they pleaded, lest he might hurt us, kill us. When the ritual eventually started, we did not know what to expect. Heading to the Sweden house where it was to be held, the full moon lighting our way as we walked along the dirt road, we anticipated to be met by the sound of drumming as we approached the house, worrying that we might have missed out much of it as we were late. To our surprise, we arrived at a quiet and almost empty house, though. Climbing up the rickety ladder leading up to the front door, entering the small wooden building, there was no ritual paraphernalia in sight. The atmosphere in the room was tense, no one saying much, the few people present turning to us to keep up the conversation. Mimi was sleeping on a mattress on the floor while Maumpan sat quiet in the back corner of the house-only room. An hour passed until people finally slowly started to prepare. An hour passed until people finally slowly started to prepare the paraphernalia needed to get the ritual going. A brass bowl was filled with rice and decorated with some flowers and banana leaves. A plate with incense wood was prepared, and Minnie's husband was sent off to fetch a shaman's assistance on his motorbike. When the ritual finally started upon their return, it was already 10:30 in the evening. Usually, ritual starts around dusk. As it turned out, Maumpan did know the basic chants of belly and healing. That's a picture of him. He was chanting quietly, though, in stark contrast to his usually rather loud and boisterous ways, and the ritual was short, lasting for just about an hour. Whether Maumpan's primary intention with the ritual was to counter the magic of the potion thought to have caused Mimi's condition, it was rumored that she had married someone else's husband, which raised suspicions of sorcery being involved, or to undo the sorcery suspicions directed at himself by performing as a healer can only be speculated upon. Most people, both those present at the ritual and those that were not, remained both skeptical of his skills and scared of his intentions. What all agreed upon, however, was that he possessed powerful magic. The fact that Mimi suddenly became possessed by spirits during the second day of the ritual, causing her body to shake violently, making her cry out loud, forcing people to hold her tightly, while Maumpan recited some spells over her, brushing over her with some leaves, only seemed to deepen their unease. Mimi kept by. Yet, Belian is always a renegotiation of relations, and as such a becoming, the premises and outcome of which are not necessarily concomitant. Results are not immediate or tied to single performances, but processes in which rituals follow upon rituals and involve a continuous negotiation of relations. When we met Maumpan at the weekly market in Sambung sometime after, he rather boisterously assured us that Mimi was cured, with a certainty quite unlike that of most shamans I knew, who often said that one can never be sure when it comes to spirits. When I met Mimi 2 years later, her spells of fainting seemed to have disappeared, but most people I talked to attributed her recovery to other rituals performed after the one conducted by Maumpan, or perhaps to a combination of rituals. She was still prohibited from entering houses in which rituals were performed, the spirit interference being perceived as too great a risk to her betterment, and hence she kept away in the kitchen during rituals performed in the village, helping out with the cooking. Still, while unpredictability and uncertainty have always been parts of both Luangan's social life and healing practices, there does seem to be an increase in sorcery suspicions lately in inexplicable and untreatable conditions to which neither modern doctors nor always shamans seem to have a cure. In the next year, still another of Maumpan's brothers suddenly fell ill and died shortly after, at about the same time as the newly appointed village head also died during similar circumstances. Both patients were taken to the new regional hospital, which is a 5-hour motorcycle drive away, but were sent home again, the illnesses being untreatable by modern medicine, being man-made, the doctors had said, or so it was claimed. Like witchcraft among the Buli described by Niels Boebant, Luangan sorcery and its healing may be interrogated as an aporia, an experiential conundrum, expressing a sense of not knowing where to go or whom to trust. Such uncertainty is a fundamental quality of an existential vulnerability, which nevertheless is exacerbated by the scale and pace of recent change, I suggest. Magic and healing in this context is not about seeking a solution to such uncertainty, though, but a way of engaging it relationally, which is a process that might mean breaking relations as well as repairing them. Agency in this framework is not straightforward or uncomplicated, but a way of facing the danger of non-relationality through re-enchantment, non-relationality being nothing else than the end of your being, as Mark Zuckerberg has expressed it. In opposing ways, both Maompan's insistence on performing the ritual for Mimi and the audience's refusal to fully participate in it testified to relationality as the only remedy, however partial, to the uncertainty caused by non-relationality. In this sense, the efficacy of Abellian rituals is dependent on a conditional ontology of not knowing, in which the endemic indeterminacy of social life forms the preconditions for its transformation. This spurs a continuous extension of ritual sociality, whereby shamans reach out to a large number of spirits during rituals, so as to potentially reach the guilty one, along with the diversification of ritual forms, sometimes incorporating different shamanic styles in single rituals, again to appeal to as many different spirits as possible. To be affected by another, whether in the form of sorcery or healing, or possession by spirits, or just through a felt absence, an atmosphere, or some mediating redolent object, such as a photograph, is an essentially embodied process, testifying to our constitutive relationality and, in Luangan perceptions, a fundamental permeability of selves, a susceptibility to external attack and capture by spirits, but also to the transformative force of encounter. Vulnerability, in Judith Butler's words, is not a subjective disposition, but a relation to a field of objects, forces, and passions that impinge upon us or affect us in some way. As such, she perceives it is patently a quality of the body, which she understands as less an entity than a relation which cannot be fully dissociated from the infrastructural and environmental conditions of its living. As these examples have shown, the presence of unknowable others bring along an orientation of continuous relational attunement and an effective receptivity whereby intimate, if not always concordant, kin through their permeable bodies in relation may be altered and reshaped in complex and convoluted ways. This condition is also the impetus for an interpersonal orientation of open-ended mutual responsibility, a sort of responsive relatedness which pervades Luangan sensibilities. In their experiences, as the profusion of curing rituals bear out, relationality with humans as well as with other than humans is an indivisible condition of well-being and the only remedy against the opacity and unpredictability that others always constitute. Here, as in Levinas's conceptualization, ethics involves opening up to the call of the other and entering a space. Okay, it's living on. Here, as in Levinas's conceptualization, ethics involves opening up to the call of the other and entering a space of not knowing, of essential uncontrollability, which involves vulnerability, yet also responsibility. For Maompan, this seemed to be a call which he both ignored and reclaimed at the same time. And I will end here. The idea was that at the end I will show you some pictures of Luangans, how Luangans are affected by humans and non-humans in rituals. But this started, so to speak. Yeah, so this is first a shaman who catches the soul of a patient, he grabs it in the air and then puts it in a small tin with so-called soul oil in it, and then he inserts it in the patient's head via Bertuso. And here's a shaman who's been possessed by spirits and drank the blood of the pig there. Another patient possessed by spirits, and another one. And here are a patient who spits, and what Luangans do is they make these small figurines representing themselves, they call them ganti diri in exchange of yourself, and then they give them to spirits instead, and so that they will get their soul back. Another one.
The cards are what we call statues. The cards, these cards.
Cards.
There were these cards. You mentioned statues, but what I see is cards.
These are small pieces of banana leaf, and on them they have made a rice past small human figurines, so to speak. You maybe don't see so well that it's a human. It's difficult to see there, maybe, but. And there's a shaman sucking out the illness of a patient. And there's another shaman dancing with a patient. Yeah, so that was